thank you all so much. So you've heard a little bit of an intro. I want to give a tiny bit more background on who we both are, because so much of this talk is about both what we already know and what we learned from each other. So between the two of us, we have more than 20 years of incident response experience. Until recently, we worked together at Datadog on an overall security incident response process. We were rebuilding a program, we're not going to talk about it, but that had gotten into a little bit of trouble. We also responded to some real incidents together. In fact, we got to work together on one in Alec's third week. In addition to the incident process at Datadog, we both have practice and experience in incident response elsewhere, so we have at least some perspective on the industry overall.
Thanks, Laura. Hey, everyone, I'm Alec. I've worked in the security detection response space for over 13 years, spending a lot of time doing incident response consulting, doing detection response engineering. I've responded from incidents ranging from the mundane, like business email compromises, to the more exciting nation-state actor type compromises. I'm currently a staff engineer on Datadog's security incident response team.
And then briefly, hi, hello, I'm Laura, in case that wasn't obvious. I've been in SRE for about 10 years now, specializing mostly in incident response and prevention. I started out as an SRE at Google, and then I spent about 4.5 years doing org-wide incident handling at Datadog. I've just started a new role at Reddit, so no longer at Datadog. You can't complain about the prices to me anymore. I have a pretty good sense, I think, about how larger scale orgs handle their outages and incidents, what we as SREs think of as best practices in that space, and then what I've seen work and what I've seen not work. At Datadog, I got to spend about the last 3 years doing some elements of security incident response, and it was a learning experience. The first and most interesting thing that I learned when I started working with folks in the security incident space is that security incident is a very loaded term. As soon as you officially call something a security incident, a lot of people care. Your compliance org cares, your lawyers care. It's entirely possible that your company board and the SEC will want to hear about everything in the company that got called a security incident. So lots of things that I would handle with our incident response process and would therefore call an incident don't actually warrant the board's attention. We've leaked a password somewhere. We have a new critical CVE to repair. Someone internally accessing something they shouldn't. Right? Those are things that I would think of as an incident and handle with an incident response process, but if I call them a security incident, there's some extra pieces to that. So for security folks, for something to be an incident, it means that there is an actual malicious actor who we have verified gained access to systems and data that they should not have had access to. That's not to say that security professionals do not use an incident response process for the issues that you and I would also use an incident response process for that don't necessarily have that malicious component. They do, but they're very sensitive to having them called incidents because of that standard and the associated reporting requirements. For this talk, we are going to be discussing an event that would fall under the classification of real security incident for an org, but for reasons we're going to talk about, this is a made-up event. This is not a real thing that has happened to any company that either of us has ever dealt with. It is built on some real principles, but it is not something that has actually happened. It's useful to remember that just like for a lot of SRE teams, really your security response team's day-to-day is much more focused on lower severity stuff. We logged an access key, someone installed malware, and our endpoint monitoring immediately quarantined it. Kind of boring stuff. Bad guy in our systems is the exciting, not so good day, but it's very rare. The process of responding to those smaller incidents also looks like ways that would be pretty familiar to you as an SRE. The bigger incidents, a little bit more going on.
All right, so first some just obligatory disclosures. While it's a mock incident that's fairly realistic, it's embellished. It's based on open source intel, such as like CISA intelligence and our own experience and vibes. We are also not speaking about or for our employers. We are speaking from personal experience across many different companies. And we are not lawyers. Nothing in this presentation is legal advice. We'll mention legal things, which we have seen from observing actual lawyers respond to real security incidents. All right, so I'll describe a full end-to-end mock scenario. It's a data theft extortion scenario, which is sadly fairly common nowadays, and we want to kind of lay this out ahead of time so folks can kind of have a framing for the rest of the presentation. So it's roughly a 5-step process. So step 1, threat actor gains access to an organization's single sign-on service. One of the most popular ways of doing so is phishing a user with a fake login page to said SSO provider. There's been a few threat actor groups that have been that do it this way. The fake login pages, they act as a proxy. So you put in your username and password thinking that you're logging into the actual SSO portal. Site proxies it to the real provider. The provider, if you're using the single sign-on times one-time passcode tokens, it'll prompt for it, which the proxy site will then pass back over to you, and you still think you're logging into the real site. And you put in your 2FA code thinking you're logging in to the real site, but that ultimately goes to the threat actor. They proxy it, and then they have a session to SSO. Next, actor is going to explore to see what juicy apps you have access to. They are particularly looking for places that have sensitive information in it, which is going to be key for the extortion phase of the incident. And for this scenario, we're just going to say that the user has it's an engineering user, elevated privileges in AWS. Threat actor SSOs in AWS starts looking at S3 buckets, trying to see if there is some sensitive data that they could try to extort with. And we'll say they find some and they download it, and they may even be jerks and try to delete the data afterwards, hoping that they have the only copy. Then they'll try to make contact with the victim organization with an extortion demand for crypto and a threat to publicly leak that data they took if you don't pay up. And then they're hoping that they profit in the end, hoping that a victim organization pays the extortion fee and they make their profit.
All right, so let's come back to the beginning. Somebody's in our systems. Obviously, we have multiple security folks who work on detection and response, just like we do for our reliability. So we should detect as soon as our employees' credentials are exfiltrated, or at worst, as soon as someone tries to use them from an unauthorized system or to do something suspicious, right? Our detection is clearly that good. So of course, as soon as we see that, we're gonna cut off the attacker's access, basically immediately, all done. If for some reason our monitoring fails, right, we're gonna do defense in depth here. Users have access only to the data that they actually need to do their jobs. Everybody works in an organization whose security posture is good for that, right? For reliability reasons even, we want to keep users from being able to fat finger a command and make a terrible mess, to say nothing of that security problem. A few users, sometimes like me, have a lot more access, but I am extremely careful with my credentials, and I have never made a single mistake in my entire life, and I would definitely not fall for a social engineering attack. Again, further defense in depth, right? Even if our monitoring somehow fails, the exploited credentials have way too much access. As an intrepid SRE, I've made sure that we have immutable backups and the ability to reliably restore them, and nothing too embarrassing sitting around on our servers. Yeah.
All right, so in reality, unfortunately, quite a lot of companies learn about these types of incidents at the time of extortion. This is often due to companies not having monitoring for this specific type of incident set up, having only off-the-shelf monitoring tooling, or not having a well-resourced, dedicated detection engineering team. Security detection and response is very expensive, so not all organizations have dedicated teams with the latest and greatest tooling. Also, some factors that make this incident possible are often rooted in deviations from established security practices. There may be engineers or users that were given access or given excessive privileges from a previous reliability incident that were not rolled back. Or there may be documented or undocumented exceptions to security standards. Also, backup standards are only as good as the scenario is considered and how well they are followed. Malicious deletion of backups is often not considered when deciding backup strategies. Ultimately, these incidents happen because the methodology these actors use broadly just works. They are motivated by profit, and methodologies that don't work aren't profitable.
Something else that I want to emphasize, again, this was something that maybe should have been apparent to me ahead of time, but me doing my job normally and correctly can be indistinguishable in an automated way from somebody using my credentials to do something nefarious. And so it can be extremely hard for automated monitoring to detect security breaches. That means that we've detected an incident via demand letter, and I will just say that I have never been more sad. Okay, but now we have an incident, so incident response 101, right? We're gonna triage, we're gonna find out what's actually been affected, we're going to mitigate, so we're gonna triage, I'm gonna spin up a big incident, right? I'm gonna pull in everyone I think can be helpful. The engineers who are going to tell us what data might be impacted, what that data means, what it means to our customers. I'm gonna pull in people who know how to shut down systems that the attacker might be in and rotate credentials. Anyone who might be able to keep data from being deleted or further exfiltrated or involved in restoring backups. Since this could affect pretty much anyone in the company and could happen to pretty much anyone in the company, we obviously want our response to be in public so we can get both all the help we might need and so people can report any impact that they might be seeing and just learn the lessons of what we've done, right? This is all incident response 101. We're gonna halt the unauthorized access, restore things, fix both the source of the breach and the ways our system didn't stop this damage.
All right, well, before we actually get into this response, there's a few things some housekeeping we have to do. Step one, engage with legal. So the reason for that is you want to do your investigation and response at the direction of legal for the purpose of them to provide legal advice to the organization. The benefit you get from doing that is your investigation and your conversations, documentation has some level of protection via legal privilege from discovery if the company were to get sued for this incident. And to maintain legal privilege, the incident must be need to know only. Lawyers must be on all communications and documents have to have appropriate legal markings on them. And I want to emphasize legal privilege does not bury an incident. Facts can't be privileged. Lawyers must, privilege doesn't mitigate legally required notifications. Additionally, don't respond to the extortion. There is little upside to doing so, and there's tons of downsides. Engaging incentivizes the threat actor to continually increase pressure on you until you pay up to and including releasing the data publicly. If you engage and you don't pay, they will more than likely release publicly. If you don't engage, there's actually a chance that they may try to make it public, but if they're still not getting a response, they'll just move on to the next victim because, again, profit motive, time is money. Now, if you do pay them, there's also no guarantee of closure of the incident. I have seen on many occasions cyber criminals coming back every couple of months, demand additional payments until an org decides it's too much, cut them off. At which point they then publicly release the data and you're kind of paid for the same outcome you would have gotten if you'd done nothing.
All right, so we're gonna make our incident private and there's gonna be lawyers and everything. That sounds really fun. They are probably going to slow us down, but we are still coordinating an incident, right? We're still doing coordinated response from multiple teams to resolve this issue. The first thing we want to do is still the same thing that we would do for any other incident. We want to triage and understand the damage. I happen to know that security orgs have big, giant piles of logs. Sometimes they'll even ask SRE for resources or to help collect and store those logs. So we definitely have the logs that will tell us everything that's happened. And security's tools for searching those logs are at least as good as the tools that I would use because that's what they do, right? And I'm sure that our experts even have a good idea of what to go looking for. Triage should be easy.
All right, so I hope that if this is like the first time you're responding to an incident in this type of situation, I hope you have all the logging turned on that you want, especially the off by default S3 data logging. I also hope we've been diligently centralizing that data into a system where it's all easily searchable, for the off chance that maybe one day you'll have to use those logs. If it's not, and the logs are just sitting in S3, you still have to do your investigation. There's no, oh, this is too hard, we can't feasibly do it. It is just not an option. Also, if we don't have logs, then there's lots of downstream repercussions. We may not be able to prove what was taken, and more importantly, what was not taken, which means we may need to overestimate what was taken. Additionally, we may not be able to identify which user account was compromised, which means we'd have to rotate everyone's credentials and terminate everyone's session in AWS, which is obviously a big, high impact. Thankfully, in our mock scenario, we do have logs that we need.
But again, not every organization will have done that investment. All right, as Alec observed, we may not only be able to just block one user. So we can't necessarily do that cleanly without other impact, although that would be sort of how I would expect to be able to respond to this incident. But we're gonna do some communication about what happened based on our triage from the logs. And when we're all done, then we're done with the main response, right? We've done triage, we've communicated, we've blocked that one user's access, rotated their credentials, onto the postmortem. I guess that does mean that I'm assuming, right, precise tools for cutting off access. Again, we know exactly which account was compromised, and downstream that we actually do know what's impacting, what systems are impacted. So if we're looking at something larger like a DOS attack, we would need better tools to block not our real users and only attacker traffic. But either way, clearly we've spent the time to build the tooling for this. This is what SREs do. Surely this is what security teams do. And it is, but there's a lot more surface area for a lot of them to cover. Maybe it gets scary and complicated if the attackers actually employ, someone just fires them, I assume. So quick and easy, we go through the logs, we're sort of done.
All right, so the highest priority is indeed kicking out the threat actor. However, kicking them out via just rotating SSO passwords and revoking sessions and calling a day is not always going to be the only step that has to be taken. So you still need to figure out how they gained access in the first place, because there's a chance that mechanism is still in place and they can just come right back in. If they got access through a fake login proxy page, like in our scenario, then it's a one-time, point-in-time compromise of credentials. Or maybe they have an info stealer malware infection on their laptop, and after you rotate those credentials, they get zoinked right back once the user tries to reuse them again. You also need to figure out all the ways they added new ways to access your environment, whether it's laterally moving and distributing backdoors on systems, or backdooring source code, adding new users, and or compromising other user accounts in the environment. If you don't remove every single way they can re-access your environment, they will come back if they want to. Depending on how sneaky they were, incidents could be a game of whack-a-mole over a period of months.
So this lateral movement thing, the fact that you're going to need to follow a single actor through many different systems that might be in totally different parts of the company. So making new users, dealing with your actual laptop, adding source code, dealing with multiple AWS access, that actually does give rise to one of the biggest differences that surprised me in security incident response. SRE teams are usually, not always, but often, organized around specific systems and services and scoped to kind of production, so that we can become experts in the systems that we work with and to give us space and incentives to fix problems in the long run and not just to mitigate as they happen. But security teams are often, sometimes, dealing with intelligent bad guys who are going to move around from your sales platform to your source code to your production systems if they can. And so your security response team needs to not have boundaries between those things, because things will get dropped. Potential additional access will get dropped in those boundaries between teams if you have them. Back to our incident. I'm in my happy place. I love incidents. We've got a bunch of things to do, explore a bunch of different systems for access and impact, lock off access. We can use our standard incident coordination and communication. We're going to track, organize, delegate work. And while the incident is private, I'm going to read people in as they join, do what the lawyer said, and I can pull in whoever I need to help me. So now we're just at normal major incident response coordination.
So organizing and delegating tasks is pretty similar between reliability and security incidents. So need to know means you can pull people in as you need them for rotating a credential, nuking a system, whatever is needed. The main difference you'll see, though, is how quickly investigation scope can grow to be absurd. So every single system or app that a threat actor touches has to be reviewed to figure out what they did. So for example, if you've got one SSO account that touches 20 applications and they SSH to 50 EC2s, then congratulations, we have 71 data sets to analyze. So unfortunately, the level of effort a cyber criminal puts into their compromises versus the level of effort an incident response team has to put in is very asymmetric. Something that may take a threat actor 5 minutes to do may be a couple hours for an analyst to review and figure out what they did. And then once you're confident that the threat actor is fully kicked out, then there's the impact assessment, where team analyzes and categorizes the data that threat actor touched, no matter the volume. And I want to say data discovery sucks, because you have to do deep data analysis and determine if any data is regulated by law, by contract, or if you're a publicly traded company, whether there be a material impact on company earnings. If there is such data, then there's a requirement to notify the individuals or companies whose data was impacted. And you may even possibly have to file, if you're a public company, file an 81K with the SEC. If you're lucky and there's no regulated data and the incident is not material, which means there's no actual legal or contractual requirements for it to become public. And few companies will voluntarily talk about an incident publicly if there's no requirement to do so.
This, by the way, was also a surprise to me. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but the fact that we don't disclose many of our incidents on the security side. But okay, security incidents do have a different flavor here. In my non-security experience, incidents are rarely longer than a few hours, and they're bad ones when they are longer than a few hours. Teams who deal more with hardware, especially things like networking, they might be waiting on delivery times of physical equipment, but those are much more, in my experience, the exception rather than the rule. So multi-day incidents are incredibly uncommon. They are the norm in security. You are going to be slogging through data for weeks. As SREs, we also know more or less when we're done, right? We need to write a postmortem. Sometimes long-term fixes can be hard to scope, but the incident's over when the customer impact is done and we have a reasonable belief that we've prevented an immediate relapse. Sometimes we might need extra analysis around customer-specific impact, but we'll usually do that outside of our emergency context. There are ticking timelines. There are clocks for how quickly you need to notify people about breaches, and that means that you are on emergency response to dig through that customer data. As we spend that time figuring out exactly what happened and what was exposed, still on our incident footing, what do we tell our customers? My instinct is to post a public message for customers as soon as we get that ransom demand, to let them know that we have a problem, we're looking into it. Often I'm on a ticking clock to post something to customers looking for something like 10 or 15 minutes. And then for the first few hours to post what we know, what we're still looking into every hour or so, because that's what we normally do. I'm also used to the approvals for communications about incidents being relatively minimal, because otherwise we can't get them out at that speed. We find with outages that it's important to be transparent with our customers. Some of that's because they already know that we're down, but let them know what the impact is to them as specifically as possible as soon as we know, including giving them workarounds. Depending on the specific business, we might need to talk to individual customers. But the lawyers aren't going to let us do things that way.
Yep, your feelings are right. So I most often see lawyers advise to don't talk publicly about an incident unless there is a legal or contractual requirement to do so. There's not a lot of upside in doing so, communicating externally if you don't have to. Sure, it feels good to be transparent, and you may build trust with some customers, but there are going to be plenty of other customers that will be upset. There may be lawsuits, and it can turn into a PR mess pretty quick. Also, if you talk about or give details about incidents too early, you may have to walk things back. And having to walk things back is not a good look for your customer base. Also, if the threat actor follows through with their threats to publicly leak data, it is often better to just not acknowledge it, unless customers are asking questions about it. Security incidents nowadays are sadly very common, and data leaks are also very common. So it very frequently flies under everyone's radar, despite a threat actor's best efforts to make the work publicly known. And I want to emphasize, this sucks, and I wish it wasn't this way, but it's the reality I've observed over the past 13 years.
The other fly in this ointment about communication, which I don't have on the slides, but the other fly in this ointment about communication, when I communicate about an incident, especially from a B2B, I'm talking to engineers at my customers, right? That's who cares about us being down in general. And so I'm talking to people who think like me, who have the same priorities. Often when you disclose something about a security incident, the people that you're going to be dealing with are the compliance organization at your customers. And they're gonna ask questions for months afterwards. Many times those questions won't make a lot of sense. They can be very high effort to answer, but they don't think about the same problems in the same ways. And so it can just generate a huge amount of work to do a disclosure, which is also a challenge. All right, but we've been doing this for weeks. We think we found all the data that was accessed. We've cleaned up. We've fully locked the bad guy out. We understand how they got in. We get to write a postmortem. Obviously, this was a huge expense for us as a company. We never want to go through this again. And we need everyone to understand how and why it happened. We want to write a really transparent and comprehensive internal postmortem about what went wrong, how our systems can better prevent this, what firewalls we need between systems, as well as better phishing prevention, maybe better detection. We want to examine how our response could have been better. Do we need better tools to dig through our logs and make that faster? Are there other things we need to mitigate more quickly? Start broadly, share broadly. I know the lawyers aren't going to let us share with customers, but it does build trust, in my experience, to explain what went wrong. Being able to learn from incidents across the industry with shared transparency makes us all better. And so it's really going to hurt my feelings that we can't share this information more publicly. My experience, again, on the SRE side, public postmortems can be high level, but we have enough background knowledge to get a good sense of what's going on and be able to fix those things in our own companies. Unfortunately, because of the regulatory reasons, the lawsuits, compliance orgs, it's much harder to learn these things across security within industries. Obviously, our postmortem is blameless. We're not going to focus on which humans did what wrong, but rather on how we can make sure our system doesn't have this vulnerability anymore.
So postmortems are still blameless in security incidents. And while lawyers prefer nothing is in writing, postmortems are high value enough where I almost always see a postmortem get written. However, since the document reflects on what went wrong, why they went wrong, and what security controls are missing, it is great material for a lawsuit. If there's a lawsuit, this document is great for a plaintiff to use as words against the victim organization to try to show negligence. We'll hedge against this possibility by being careful with wording and how we write it in postmortems. This also is where legal privilege can help reduce the risk of postmortem being in scope of discovery. The legal privilege means access to the postmortem is need to know only, even internally.
So even though I think everyone needs to know what's in the postmortem, it turns out the lawyers don't always agree. It means we can't even really share internally. It makes me really worried that we're going to have those same problems happen again, not even in the industry, but just within our own company. As a person who uses computers, knowing I'm only going to hear about someone's security problems if they are legally required to tell me about it does not make me feel good. That is the industry. Okay, but we want to fix what we can. Again, because the postmortem will identify actions for various teams. Some of those actions are fast, some of them might be huge projects. Every organization struggles to prioritize their actions in the best possible way, but the teams that we give those actions to usually do understand what problems they're trying to fix, why they matter, and they'll be able to advocate for reasonable prioritization when they do the work because they understand why they need to do that work, and they'll understand if they've really solved the problem. I would also expect for a large enough incident that somebody's going to make a public dashboard for executives and stakeholders to track progress on the work that we're doing.
So dashboards, widely viewable tickets, and updates to leadership also do happen in security incidents. It's just that they don't go into much detail on the why this thing that needs doing mid-quarter needs to be done. And please know that the asks are coming from a good place. Everyone involved in the incident, including leadership, security, legal, no one wants the incident to happen again. The incident's best case is, a risk of burnouts. At worst, it can be somewhat traumatic for some folks. And ultimately, no one wants to go through the process again. So how can you help during your next security incident? So if you find yourself in the middle of a fire in security incident land, here are some tips. Abide by rules of privilege, which means only talk about the incidents with people already involved with the incident, putting special markings on documents, including legal on email, Slack, voice discussions about the incident. And when in doubt, there's going to be some legal representative involved in the incident. Just ask them. They're going to be more than happy to give you advice on how to talk about a concept. Ask before taking action. Nuking a system that is infected with malware before we can collect evidence may lead to investigative questions we can't answer. Ask if there's anything you can help with. If the incident is big, there is more than likely more tasks than there are people during an incident. If you're given a task, ask what investigative questions do you want answered, and then focus on using the data available to you to answer that question. If you can't answer a question or you can't give a confident answer, just keep notes on why. Call out log sources that might be valuable. Security will know the typical log sources, CloudTrail, endpoint EDR logs, but they're going to more than likely be a little less familiar with all of the internal application logs that are available to them. And if the incident responder or incident commander is being calm, match their vibe. So incident commander being calm is a sign of experience. They might have seen this incident before and kind of know what to expect, and also have some predictions of what the final impact is going to be. Or if they don't, they may be being calm to try to keep everyone else calm because panicked people make mistakes.
Just because it has security on the label doesn't mean it's actually much more panic, shouldn't be more panic-inducing than the same incident or an incident of the same size in your more familiar realm. So some other things that you can bring from the SRE experience that can help a lot with security incident response. You notice I talked a little bit about having relatively large volumes of logs that might not be right when we need them. They might be painful to search and process. At a minimum, can we make sure that we're only collecting data once, not duplicating information when we already have it from our monitoring systems? Can we help our security orgs build production-ready monitoring pipelines for at-scale log processing? We're good at that. Let's do it. It's quite likely that your security team does not have that expertise and would really appreciate your help. We also have a lot of touch points with many systems and teams in production. We can help our security teams build accurate mental models of what kinds of attacks are more likely to work in our system, which can let them prioritize the right monitoring and response tools on their side. We can get involved in their chaos testing. They'll usually call them red team or purple team exercises. They would love your help, almost always. And build relationships with your security responders, both so that they know that they can call you when something goes wrong, and honestly, after the fact, when they need to ask you to make changes and they can't tell you why, so that you have that trust built up with them, and you are able to work with them even if you don't know exactly what's going on. You personally can make friends with lawyers. It turns out that lawyers are also human beings. I know that's surprising. If they already know and trust you, those lawyers, they are more likely to be able to explain their concerns as part of the response and to hear and understand what you need from them and what you can give them in the moment versus what you can give them later. Be able to tell them things like, that question that you just asked is going to take 6 hours to investigate. Do you really need to know? And maybe let's translate it to something else. You should also make sure that those lawyers have the same expectations about responsiveness and responsibility during an emergency as you do for them. Do they understand that when I page you, I expect you in 10 minutes at 3 in the morning and the person who answers can make decisions, or are they thinking about something else? And finally, I really recommend advocating for a shared response process and tooling for your security incidents with whatever your normal process is. You might get some pushback here. Some security teams may not be aware that the SRE response to outages is an organized, coordinated process, that we have good tooling, that we have responsibilities around data tracking. Invite them to some existing incidents that your team is involved with and be open to hearing where they do have distinct needs. They're going to need private incidents, right? But because your security team is likely to need to rely on other engineers for incident response, demystifying your process for them means that you can have a uniform response across the company. And that makes everybody's work better overall. I want to encourage you to also get involved with your security response teams. Aside from the lawyers and the limited communication and all of that, which was definitely new for me, most of security incident response is something you already know how to do. It's thorough log analysis. It's going through mountains and mountains of logs with your common sense about what's important in production, how it's put together, guiding intent and conclusions. Being able to bring your own well-developed sense of what works and what doesn't is an enormous benefit to your security team. When I joined my my first few security incidents, I found myself kind of using 3 skills most often. First, just figuring out what I can do and not do with the access or information that we thought an attacker might have. Somebody tells me we think that they have that access. What could I do in production with that? Second, thinking about what that would mean for our customers. Why would someone want to take the actions we've identified as probably working? Is that something that they can extort money for? Is that something that they could invade customer systems and do something else with? What could you do? Your security team will also be thinking about those 2 things, and they will call them a threat model. And then finally, just basic incident planning and coordination. Who's in charge? What's our next goal? How do we get there? Tracking who's working on what task, tracking what's still to be done, all of that normal coordination. I certainly had to learn, and this is why Alec reminds you that if the incident commander is calm, you should be calm. Security incidents are not a catastrophe. They're bad, but don't catastrophize. The fact that someone could conceivably do something with my level of knowledge also doesn't mean that an outside attacker will or did. The systems we work in are complicated. None of us should believe in security through obscurity as a good thing to do, but you do actually get kind of a lot of it just through the complexity of the environments that we work in. I find that it can help to remember that security is broken all the time, the same way that production is broken all the time. Discovering a problem that could cause a future outage, or even having a minor incident, is just not cause for panic. Fix the problem in our normal, professional, appropriately prioritized way. And sometimes we find potential outages where 12 things have to go wrong at once for the system to actually go down. We want to fix those, but we think about likelihood in our prioritization, and you should be applying the same knowledge about likelihood and risk mitigation and assessment to security incidents as well. Overall, we do follow the same framework with incidents. Sometimes the wording is a little bit different, but the overall process, there's an incident commander, they're in charge, this is how we're going to coordinate, it's basically the same. Demystifying the security side is mostly a matter of common sense once you get used to the lawyers.
All right, so as Laura's mentioned, a lot of skills transfer over. Incident response is mostly just looking at logs. So if you want to get into incident response, here's some suggestions I have. One, you can get up to speed on a lot of the latest and greatest threat actors by going on the CISA.gov website. They have some very detailed overviews of how these actors operate, some of the tools they use, their methodologies. It's actually a really interesting read. Highly recommend checking it out. Get familiar with MITRE ATT&CK. MITRE ATT&CK is just kind of like this reference material of the things that threat actors would probably do in an environment, to move around an environment, to run malware, to escalate privileges. It's just really good reference material. And also ask to get more involved with security incidents. Real world experience is honestly the biggest differentiator for security incident response on the market. And with that, we will get into Q&A.